So Max Power says, Sagas are what Planeswalkers should have been, in my humble opinion. It's an interesting thought, and it really goes back to actually the early Planeswalker design. Effectively, the first pass Planeswalker design was Sagas. So I'm sure you can probably Google a Mark Rosewater article on this where he talked about it. But basically, Planeswalkers were conceived of by Matt Cavada, and the first reference to Planeswalkers is actually from Future Sight, and they intended to debut Planeswalkers with Future Sight, right? Like the idea of Future Sight, the set, for those of you who don't know, is that there were a bunch of cards that theoretically were like, these are cards that are printed for the first time in the future, but they traveled back in time to be in these packs, right? That's just the conceit. But what the conceit allows the designers to do is push the boundaries a little bit, right? You're saying what risks and what things is Magic going to be doing far in the future that we can play with and imagine right now. And they were going to debut Planeswalkers in Future Sight on kind of that axis, right? Like Planeswalkers are this future thing. Yeah, I'll get to. I have my request thing, so I can look that up later, D. So anyway, the design team was working hard on, and Cavada was the one who said that Magic basically didn't have superheroes. You know, that he was looking around at the popularity of a lot of IPs and the success of comic movies at that point and stuff, and all of these these worlds have these superheroes, and Magic has them too, except as a game mechanic, the superheroes of the world were not differentiated from the creatures of the world. So Planeswalkers in Magic, before the presence of the Planeswalker card, did exist in Magic. There are creature cards that are reflective, you know, that are effectively Planeswalkers, you know. But it was Matt who was like, no, the whole game is around the fundamental concept of the Planeswalker, and it should be a creature type in our game, was his point. And Mark Rosewater agreed, and Matt, as a world builder and art director, like wanted world building around it. And then Mark was like, okay, well, we got to handle the gameplay side of it. What is a Planeswalker to you as a player if you cast it as a spell? And the initial idea was like, you have an ally who comes and helps for a little bit and then goes away. But this ally is autonomous. You can't tell Garrick or all the so they're showing up to battle next to you, but they may come and go. Right? That was the idea, the flavor of the Planeswalkers they were trying to go for. And basically, first implementation was Sagas. Like, imagine Sagas, except they are Planeswalkers. So they did try that, Max. But what they found, and I say they because I was not in the building at the time. Planeswalkers existed by the time I got there. I'd say we otherwise. But they felt that the problem with it was that it was too prescriptive for the flavor of what's going on. It didn't feel right that the whole sequence of what this Planeswalker was going to do when they showed up was already determined. That just didn't feel right. It didn't have a top-down Planeswalker feel that felt like this is an autonomous being showing up and working with you to determine how to approach this fight, right? Like, it was just like, I am a robot, I will do these things, it doesn't matter if I'm marching to my, right? And so that just felt like, these don't feel like Planeswalkers, they don't feel like real people, they don't feel like beings with, decision-making capability and all that. And then, so they went with, they actually put it off. That's why Planeswalkers didn't show up in Future Sight. They punted to the next set. And that's where they landed on what we see now, the current Planeswalker style, which does give a better feel of this is an individual that's fighting next to me, but I'm going to help them. I'm telling them what to do. I'm there. I can tell them what to do and they will listen. Like, that just felt more like you now have a partner in the battle, right? And then, but Sagas, it's not that the mechanic, it was not okay. It's not that the mechanic wasn't good in the abstract. It's just that it didn't feel like what they were aiming for with Planeswalkers. Then take Sagas. They took a a mechanical concept they'd already designed. Planeswalkers 1.0 were already designed, and then they said, why don't we fit the flavor here and use this design? And what does make sense as, hey, there's a starting point. It's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and done. And you have no control over it. This is an object that has shown up. Stories, right? So stories are just like the perfect flavor accompaniment to the initial Planeswalker mechanical design. And I love that design story because it shows how important flavor is. Like if the game were just about mechanics, Planeswalkers may have been Sagas or whatever. Sagas may have existed in Future Sight or whatever. But as it is, marrying mechanics with flavor is super important to getting players excited about the experience, getting players to feel like they're in the world, and getting players to see like, oh, this game is really clever, right? We like to feel clever, and you also want to feel like the makers of the game you're playing are also clever and have done clever things that you can appreciate. So if you think Planeswalkers should have been Sagas, I think you are missing the flavor aspect that they were going for and how disjointed it would be for that. But I always thought the creation story of Planeswalkers and the subsequent use of that mechanic in Sagas, quite appropriately, is a really neat insight into good game design. Was there ever discussion about the card type that Sagas are? Was there any chance that they would be a new card type instead of enchantments? Was it decided to be enchantments to help further the distinction between artifacts and enchantments that they have tried to do? There was never a discussion. Like you really, like, Planeswalkers are an example of creating a new creature type or not creature type, a new card type for which there was no other solution that worked. I mean, they tried creatures, but they didn't feel like creatures didn't feel right as Planeswalkers, right? So, but generally, you really want to try and use what you've already got. If you're creating a new type just to, accomplish that, sometimes you have to give in mechanically. Like, I think I hear what you're getting at, Haj, is that if you think about a story and what type it should be, you would think it would be an artifact, right? Isn't a book an artifact? But mechanically, this idea of chapters, I guess you could do an artifact that had, of course you could, right? I mean, you could have done Sagas as enchantments, or as artifacts, I suppose. But enchantment feels more right to me mechanically how it operates, but artifact feels more right to me in terms of flavor. So that's tough. And also, you are identifying a very tough place in Magic design, which is the distinction between artifacts and enchantments. Most of the things you can do on enchantments, you can do on artifacts, and vice versa. So you ask yourself, why would you do one or the other? A lot of it is flavor-based. I mean, if you need the thing to tap, you make it an artifact. Obviously, there have been actually in tapping enchantments in Future Sight, I think. But anyway, yeah, Haj, I hear you, but like that it's just a weird Venn diagram of artifacts and enchantments, and it is truly one of the challenges of Magic set design, because that distinction is very flavor based and has very little mechanical difference. All right, a little aside there. We will move on now. I think we're about ready to play. 9:20. It's about right.